My name is Bill Ennis, and for the next half hour, I have the pleasure of showing you a very cool presentation of Autodesk Flare 2011. That's our DEC open. Let's go ahead and move into the presentation. All right, well, Flare put simply is a tool that makes your investment in Flame much more valuable. Flare is Flame's companion product, and it's much more than a simple rotoscoping tool or an assistant workstation. It's exclusively available to Flame owners, and Flare is a software-only version of Flame, Flame's actual creative tool set. It's actually the batch module you see here that's been pulled out into a software-only version of the product. So it's 100% compatible with Flame. And the key to talking about Flare is really all about flexibility and the way you can deploy it in your facility. So Flare can work side by side with the Flame system on a single project, as we're going to show you in this workflow, or it can be used as a standalone application to take on more jobs and increase the capacity of your facility. So Flare also works with a floating license, so you can move it around to different machines in the facility. And finally, Flare can work on a laptop. So if you actually wanted to, you could take this laptop with a Flare software on it and bring it out into the field and use it on set. So it's almost like bringing a Flame with you to a shoot. You can see on camera now we're showing for our viewers on the internet Tobasan holding up a laptop with Flare running on it. And thanks to our partners at HP for providing that laptop. So let's talk a little bit about the on-set workflow. Most facilities these days offer on-set VFX supervision services to ensure that what gets captured in the field is actually shot correctly. And Flare will work with and read different media formats. It can also work with different devices, like the Key Pro, another one of our partners, AJA. So what is it all about? Well, it's really about bringing Flame's great tools on location. And the reason you might want to do that is because if you have those tools on set, you can do things like green screen keys right on set with you. And you can verify things like camera angles. And you can also do things like 3D tracking. So these are the things that I'm going to actually show you in this demonstration. In the job that we're actually going to take you through today, what's kind of cool about it is it was done at CBS Digital in Hollywood, also known as Inertia. And they do a lot of episodic work, and they use Maya to create virtual sets. So what you see on the left side is the finished shot from an episodic, and on the right you see a breakdown of the behind the scenes of how this was actually done. So this is a very familiar street in Los Angeles, so it's important to make sure that you know where you are in the scene. But it's actually all created virtually in a library of Maya assets, and then it can be repurposed for things like commercial work. And that's exactly what they did at CBS Digital Inertia. They created a commercial for Prada that was using that same virtual set. So you can see in the background we have our Maya asset there. It's a virtual set, 3D models. But it looks really realistic, and the people who from Prada actually wanted to use that same asset in a more stylized way for this beautiful ad that I want to play for you right now. Audio, please.
Got my engines.
So that's just a great ad, and again, thanks to Inertia in Hollywood for providing that to us. So what I want to do now is take you through an example of how Flare can work side by side with a Flame. So I'm going to sort of drive this, this demo and work from the Flare workstation here. And I've got Flare 2011 loaded up right here in front of you. So what we see when we first launch into the application is the creative tool set of Flame in the procedural compositing area known as Batch. And let's go into our library now and bring in some of the footage that we want to work with for the demo. So I'll grab one of the green screen shots and several elements and load them into that environment. So we've got our green screen. We can actually set the duration of our timeline to match that. Let's go ahead and bring that up and show you that it is a moving shot. So we've got a camera move on this particular green screen. We have a lot of tracker marks on the background, and we need to key the talent. Let's go ahead and grab from our keyer bin what's called the master keyer. And this is, again, one of the many tools you're going to see that are based on the Flame tool set that are just super powerful and very creative tools. First thing I need to do is sample the green screen. So I'm just going to take a quick sample, and you can see right away we get a good starting point for our key. Well, to verify any good key, of course, you need to look at the mat. You can see we still have a little problem with our mat. But look at how cool the master keyer is. If I hover over different parts of my image, I'm presented with different sliders. And these sliders are automatically analyzing what I'm hovering on and sampling, that particular pixel, and then it gives me ways of actually including or excluding those pixels. So if I just make that slider move a little bit to the left, I've cleaned up that area inside of my mat. We also have multiple patches here. So if I wanted to maybe patch inside this one key, a second key on top of it, you see I can take a sample with a patch of the green screen, and it's turning it black. It automatically knows I want to make that area black, and I can extend the range to kind of bring that and extend that selection out. And now look at my key. You can see, notice the hair, how nice and clean the hair is in that particular shot. Now, the rest of the work that needs to get done are the typical things you need to do in procedural compositing. Obviously, I'm starting to pull the key, but I need to get rid of the tracking marks. So back out here in my tool bin, I'm simply going to bring a garbage mask tool out. And we're going to take the original footage, and we'll also take the mat that we started working with, and we're going to start creating our mask. So again, powerful masking tools are the key to doing this type of work. If I go in now and just take a few points, move them around our talent, close up that shape, you can see that I can pretty quickly and easily isolate her from the background. So we can go ahead and look at that result, take that to the outside, and take the color down. So we're getting there. That's working pretty well, but we have a bigger challenge, the fact that the mask is static and our camera move is making us have to animate or move those points of the mask by hand. It's a very tedious process, but not here in this software. Inside of Flare, I can simply turn on a tracking tool and say, let's track the movement of the talent. And if I just say, let's place two tracking marks, one to calculate the rotation and scaling simultaneously, you can see that I can quickly analyze that movement, and then that movement can be applied to my mask, and now my shape is actually moving along with the talent. This saves you tons of time, and that's what it's all about. Time is money. So let's go in and start to move our points, kind of get these points exactly where we want them on the last frame. You see, it's easy for me to kind of manipulate just a couple of keyframes instead of one for each and every frame of this animation. And we'll go ahead and get that sort of sorted out for our entire sequence. You can see her arm kind of moves a bit there, so we'll fix that up on the left side. And now we've got that working pretty well. But if we look at our mask, we still have one more problem. You can see that some of the tracking marks are actually intersecting with the talent. And that's a problem that can be solved, again, with the creative tool set of Flame here in Flare. Let me just go back to my bin for my keying, and I'll pull out a paint node. So these are the three nodes, the essential nodes that you need when you're doing this kind of work: keying, masking, and painting. And here I'm just going to simply take my paint tool. I'm actually going to insert that into my procedure, just drop it in with a hotkey. And what's really neat here inside of Flare is I can actually set a context. And if I set a context further down in the procedure, I can actually set this up to put my context view on one side and the localized view of my paint on the other side. And this is great, because now I can start painting in the context of my key. So if I go in and want to do something like a recursive clone brush, let's use a recursive clone. We can change the size of the brush. We can simply sample one area of the green screen and just paint it over those marks. And you'll see that in context, I can quickly remove any of those problem areas. And I won't do all of them, but I just wanted to give you the idea of how this technique can help us solve this problem. So again, quick and easy to just paint that out. So we'll see that one disappear. All right, so let's get back into the rest of the demonstration. I'm going to go into what's called action. This is really the heart of the system. And what this allows us to do is 3D compositing. So based on the key that we already started, now I want to start to integrate some elements into this scene. Well, 3D tracking is part of what the action module can do automatically. Notice as soon as I click on track, boom, an analysis is sent off, and the original camera from the day of the shoot is recreated here inside my 3D compositing environment. You can see the original camera is still there in front of that, and you see a bunch of tracking marks all over that background. Let's look in the top view and see what's really going on in this scene. We've got a point cloud now extending into the 3D space of that environment. You can see that from the top view, we see our original camera in front of that 3D tracked camera. Let's go in now to our schematic view and hide that original camera. We just need to hide it, and then back out here in the top view, we see just our new moving camera that was generated automatically for us in the 3D tracking. Now, we don't need all these tracking points. We've got the camera, so let's reset the tracker now and start to bring in different media into this environment. So I'm just going to add a couple of layers, and we'll take these layers now, and we'll start to put things into this scene. So I'll start with just a temporary background plate. It's just a still frame. And then we'll also take for our second layer the result of our first step, which was our key, and we'll combine these into our scene. So now when I scrub through the timeline, you can see I have both of those elements in front of that virtual camera that came back from the 3D track, and you can see that both those elements appear to move in that scene. Well, you can also see that my original plate back here that I started with for the analysis, I don't need that anymore, so let's turn that off. But I don't want to have the camera applied to the talent once again. That's where we derive the information. We actually need to negate that information. So let's go ahead and split the views. What I can do back here in the schematic, and that's what's so great about working in this type of way, I can connect up that particular layer to my camera. So when we look down on the scene now, you can see that she's actually attached to the camera. She's moving in unison with that camera. And all I need to do now is simply change the size of her image, and I'll move her back in Z space. And actually, we can look at that in the top view as I do it. I just need to move her back in Z space to kind of fit the frame. And as soon as I fit the frame there, maybe scale this down slightly more. Let's make it fit perfectly. How's that? And now you'll see that she's locked to the camera and not being affected by that camera anymore. So now we've got that solved. Let's take our other element, and we're just going to start to integrate our temporary plate into the scene. We're going to rotate it around. We'll also scale it up, move it up a bit, and now you can see we've got her negated by the movement with our temporary plate. Well, I'm not working in a vacuum here in this workflow. I actually have that set up, but what I really want to drop in is that virtual set that we saw in the final. So what I want to do is bring in Maya. So let's go ahead and split the views a bit and bring in our Maya workstation. So I've got Daryl Aubert on the end of the table here working with Autodesk Maya, and he's got that scene that I want to drop in 3D live here for you to see. Daryl, do you want to tell us a little bit about this scene?
Well, this is obviously the same scene that we saw that was in the finished piece, and this is just a roughed out block of the camera move that's going to get matched back up inside of Flame, and you can see that we don't have the full textured scene, but what we do have is all the geometry and the really cool camera move.
And that's all we really need for this particular piece. What we want to do is actually drop just sort of a rough stylized view of that 3D environment into our scene. So back here in Flare, I'm just going to get rid of my temporary background, and I'm going to import through the film box format, which is a standard format that was actually created at Autodesk. And it's actually a universal format to exchange data between applications. So here I'm dropping in that environment, and if I zoom out, you can see there's my model behind my talent. Now let's go ahead and add a light. I'm introducing a light into the scene. Let's actually do it this way so I can get to it quickly. And we're going to be able to start to light this scene. Now, I actually don't want the talent to be affected by the light. So what's really nice in the 2011 version is we've introduced shaders. And shaders not only change the architecture overall to improve lighting and the way our lights respond to surfaces and objects, but they can also be used to do quick things like, say, don't affect the talent. Turn off the shading for that particular layer. Next thing I'll do is go ahead and increase the intensity of that light, and I'll move the light back to hit our entire environment. So let's just move it up as well while we're doing that. Now if we zoom out, you can see our lit environment. And I just need to take the geometry that we've got a lot of different pieces of geometry there. You can see it's quite a big scene. I can get to all the individual parts of this virtual set if I want to. And I'm just going to rotate that around. And notice as I rotate around, I'm actually passing through the car with my camera. So that's kind of cool. Let's go ahead and move that back now behind the talent. And now you'll see that our 3D environment, like our 2D temporary still frame, is now locked to that camera and is starting to be integrated into our scene. That looks pretty good, but when we zoom in, you can see that model, the car looks a little bit rough. And in the 2011 version, what's great about using batch, both in Flame and inside of Flare, is we now support hardware anti-aliasing. And as soon as I turn on hardware anti-aliasing, I'm taking advantage of the NVIDIA graphics card, a really awesome graphics card. Thanks to NVIDIA for partnering with us for that. And you can see I can go all the way up to 32 samples of hardware anti-aliasing. I'll just leave it at 4, because that even looks pretty good. We can also go back to our light and start to create our stylized look. So let's start to put in a little bit of color. And now let's go back and add the last couple of layers. So we're going to add 2 more layers. And now we'll introduce another element to kind of break the background plane a bit. And we'll also introduce our logo. So this one is, I guess the name of the talent is Lindsay. We'll go into our schematic view. I'm not going to use that just quite yet, but I will split the views again and look down on the scene. So you can see there's our scene from above, and I want to introduce this layer into kind of fill this background behind her. I'm also going to bring her back up on top in priority. We're going to drop her on top, so that gets rid of those aliased edges there. And we'll go in and quickly scale this up, rotate that piece of background into place, something like that. And you can see that very quickly I was able to walk this into my scene, and it's also being affected by the camera. So again, all these tools allow us to easily manipulate things in front of that camera and create our own virtual environment based on the assets that we brought in from Maya, which is just great. The last little bit of this is taking that logo, I'm going to introduce it as a 3D tool, and that's, in this case, called a 3D projection. And a 3D projection is another great tool inherited in Flare from Flame. What it allows me to do, and here in the top view I can just move it back, is point any image I want into this environment, and it'll wrap around and hit and interact with all of this 3D space. I don't want it to actually affect the talent, so I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. But we'll go back to the projector now and say, let's use a different blending mode, something like subtract. And now if we go back into the top view, I can start to rotate that projector around. You can see how it's reacting to the surface of that 3D model. As I rotate it also in X, you can see it passes across. So we can create some really nice effects this way inside of Flare. So there's my finished shot. I'm ready to render. I'm ready to send this back to the Flame system, which is working on the overall job. So this is great. I can pass this 100% compatible setup over to the Flame system, where the timeline is being assembled from multiple shots that get delivered at the end to either tape or as files. So here we have Toba-san working on the Flame. He can take the shot that I just gave him, and he can drag and drop it into that one segment along this big master timeline. So he's kind of got a work in progress. He's actually working on the overall job. You know, he's basically keeping track of what's going on. Maybe he's feeding multiple shots out in the facility to multiple Flare workstations. Again, they're bringing them back, and he's getting all that done. The beauty of having 100% compatibility is he's able to actually step back into that scene. If he needs to do any kind of revisions, he can go and he can tweak it. He can change the color of things. He can do all of this on the Flame workstation. So again, we'll continue letting Toba-san revise and work on that particular job, but let's get back into our second example in just a second once we explain sort of in a graphical way our capacity story. So imagine you're working on this particular job. We've got 16 individual shots pulled out of that master timeline, and there's a lot of keying that needs to get done. Literally, they were actually 65 in the final version. And when you're bidding a job like this, the thing that's really challenging is kind of allocating the amount of time you're going to need to actually accomplish and finish each of those different shots. So some of them are more difficult than others. Let's say arbitrarily, that one's going to take 6 hours. That one's a pretty easy one. It's only going to take 1 hour. But whatever you're doing, the total is going to be about 38 hours. And if you only have one Flame, well, you're going to have to tie up your Flame system for an entire week. Well, that's the proposition we're trying to give you guys with Flare. If you think about it, you could divide and conquer and actually send with one Flare system a lot of those shots over and have them being done concurrently. So you could actually get that job done in half the time. Let's say 19 hours. Well, we'd love you to buy more Flares. How about buy 2 or even 3 Flares, and now you're getting that job done in about a day. And again, time is money. Capacity allows you to be able to get that job through the door faster and bring in the next job and make more money. And that's what it's really all about in this case. Just we wanted to make sure we could communicate sort of visually how the Flare system can benefit Flame owners. So let's get back into our Flare system, where I'm just going to clear out what we were working on before. Let's get back into our project bin and take a look at another shot. So I have sort of a work in progress here. We've seen keying. We kind of get the idea how this shot was composed. So I'm going to split the views and bring up the schematic view, and I'll just temporarily hide our talent in the foreground. So what you see in this particular example is actually just some basic CG renders. So you see that we can work easily with Maya, and maybe Maya generated these multiple passes for me to do my final design work back here in Flare. You can see I can animate a light across those 4 layers, and it's just kind of a flat, boring piece so far. But what if we wanted to take it a bit further? Let's go to each of the individual layers, and now based on the new pixel shader architecture within the application, you can see that I can get a really nice look as I start to adjust just the shine value in front of that light. As I'll just adjust a few of the layers to give you the idea of how we can take something that looks really flat at first and start to change it in front of our 3D environment. So you can see we've got the ability to completely change the look based on the lighting. And now you'll see the light pass across our scene, across the background buildings, and that's starting to look pretty cool. Again, the shaders themselves can be attached to the individual layers, so I can actually shade them individually, which gives me more control over that look. So for example, I could use standard filtering algorithms or shader algorithms like anisotropic, Cook torrents, car paint. If I were to use the anisotropic and move the light down, you can see how it's reacting differently now than the other layers to that particular background layer. And if I were to go back to the shader and make adjustments, you can see I can create interesting looks, basically taking advantage of the lighting and the way that light is bounced off or returned to the camera. So that looks pretty cool. But we can take it a lot further. We're working in a 3D environment. We can convert any of our layers very easily with one button into 3D geometries. And now I'm able to bend that surface. And again, notice the reaction of the lighting with our new pixel shading architecture. It looks really cool. But we can take it even further than that. We can go in and subdivide individual segments of our surface. And check this out. I'll just hide the icon so you can see what I'm doing better. I'm going to grab parts of my subdivided extended by cubic and move those around. And as I move them around, I can give some depth to this. I can actually start to create something that looks a lot more 3D. I can even start to bend it and pull these points around to create, from a 2D basic rendered layer, something that looks almost like corrugated metal, right? So this is looking really cool. And if I were to orbit the camera around now, you can see we've completely changed the overall look based on our pixel shaders, based on that extended by cubic. We've got something going that I think looks a lot more visually interesting. We can also change blending modes, another great design tool. We could go in and start to play around with something like Spotlight Blend. We can change the diffuse color of that layer. And again, with our lights, you can see we've almost created like an X-ray effect. That looks really good too. Finally, I'm going to go in and start to add in what's called a substance texture. I'll add another image into my scene. Let's go ahead and attach that to our tracking, and we'll go into the substance texture map. Into the substance texture, we can see we've got an entire library of photorealistic textures that we can apply to surfaces or 3D objects. And I actually have one specifically for the road. So if your client is looking at that road on the ground and says, hey, anything you can do about that? Can you actually make that look more like a road? It's easy to actually do that. So this is what's great. I can simply do that with the flip of one, bringing in one texture. We can again blend through that texture. So let's do a spotlight, and now we're getting something that looks like a road because we've got a road substance texture applied. We can also do things like perspective mapping. This is going to allow us to lay that texture back in 3D space. So now we're going to get that at the orientation of our road, and then we'll just pull that axis down and kind of lay that on the horizon line of our road. We'll reorder the layers a little bit, kind of put that in the proper perspective, and with adding in another light and making that light exclusive to the road, now we can relight the road individually and kind of get that integrated into our scene. So you can see how quickly I was able to create a much more interesting design piece out of a very basic set of 4 rendered CG layers. Again, I think it looks good. I don't know, maybe I'm a little biased, but some people are shaking their head, yeah? And as I orbit that camera around, you can get that sense of perspective and the keystoning in front of the camera in our 3D working environment. So at this point, what I'd like to do is send this shot back to Flame. Flame's the hero suite. That's where the work is getting finalized. And you see Tobasan's got that shot, and he's ready to just drop it back down into the master timeline. He can get all these final shots coming back from the Flare suites, integrated into the final piece, and then sent out to tape or through files and give our final delivery. So hopefully you got the idea of what was going on with this type of workflow. The ability to work easily between Flare and Maya. The ability to have Flare shots fed back into the Flame suite for final finishing. And that's really what it's all about. So just to kind of finalize, there's our example of the two working together. I kind of forgot that slide. But just to kind of wrap up, we're going to talk about what we saw in this workflow demo of Flare 2011. Again, Flare inheriting all those creative tools from Flame allows it to work in association and also allows you to work back and forth with a 100% compatible environment. You also have, of course, the ability to repurpose assets from Maya, bring them into our environment through the powerful FBX format. And of course, you have Flame, which is the ultimate, really the ultimate toolbox for doing any kind of 3D finishing work. Finally, we just want to play the final down one more time. We'd like to thank our friends at CBS Digital Inertia in Hollywood. And stick around. We've got more demos all day. We've got another demo coming up right after this of Flame.
Got my ancient on the table.